I've known Tami before Wisdom 2.0 actually started, and Wisdom 2.0 started about 11 years ago, and I've known Tami probably for 14 or 15, and I don't think we've actually done many things live together. So it's a real honor, and somebody, Tami's always been somebody I respect as a businesswoman, as a spiritual teacher, and somebody who has any problem with combining those two and bringing the wisdom and the spirituality and the business together. So I hope we get some time to talk about that today and to talk about the importance of integrity in business and how do we make decisions that honor ourselves and honor the whole. So Tami, thank you for coming. It looks like you have some questions for me too.
I do, yeah.
So as we talked about this, we realized we're in a time right now of a lot of anxiety in the culture, and that anxiety could be because we don't quite know it's a presidential year, and there's anxiety around that. There's anxiety around health and viruses. There's an anxiety around climate change. And so how do we begin to relate to those anxieties in a way that actually addresses them without living in fear and without living in a kind of a constant state of panic? Because no matter what's happening, we can always find something to panic about. And so I wanted to kind of present that as a question for you. How do you as a business leader see a problem, notice your response to the problem, and then do your best to respond accurately to what is showing up?
I want to answer that, but first I want to address something that you said when you were introducing me, which is you said Tami doesn't have a problem bringing spirituality and business together. And the thought that I had is, who took them apart? Because that's like taking me apart. Those are both parts of my being. Mm-hmm. The business part of me likes to be independent and create and contribute to the lives of other people and make money for my family. Mm-hmm. And the spiritual part of me is every single cell of my body and who I am. Mm-hmm. And they don't exist apart. And that's not acceptable to me even as a premise. So just saying that it's a different way of thinking about it. We keep trying to bring all these things together. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a very interesting question. How did they become apart? Right. Okay, now your question about fear in our time, anxiety in our time, and the stresses that we feel ourselves under.
And from one spiritual, there's certain people who are like, oh, everything's perfect. I'm in Somatic now. I don't need to really deal with all these human problems. And other people are so immersed in the problems, they're not tasting their food. They're not appreciating the sunsets, that we're immersed in our minds, our fears of our minds. So that's kind of the question.
Yeah, I think we have to be awake to what's happening around us and not be like an ostrich with our head in the sand. That would be foolish and a form of denial. At the same time, the more grounded we are, the better able we're actually going to be able to see things from a lot of different perspectives and actually see what's needed in this moment. Mm-hmm. What would be the most skillful and of service in this moment? Soren, there's a spiritual teacher that you and I both have in common, whose work we really respect, probably several spiritual teachers, but one that we've talked about quite a lot, which is Eckhart Tolle. Mm-hmm. And Eckhart talks about how there can be a kind of anxiety and panic in the culture that jumps from person to person, and before you know it, you're in it. Because we're so porous as people. And that's where what is asked of us is to really turn up our presence, to actually create this kind of amplified presence power, which I would go so far as to say is a type of immunity. Mm-hmm. It's a type of immunity in our time, that when we're absolutely present, we know which things we need to attend to, what calls for us, how to make better decisions. And that without that, I'll go so far as to say we're hooped. Yeah. We're like, confetti being tossed around. Mm-hmm. So it's that anchoring, that deep anchoring in presence. And we each have our own way of doing it. Mm-hmm. As someone who I find very present, Soren, with me, and we've had lots of business calls and lots of crazy things going on in our personal lives, such as, for you, for me, we don't need to go into all of that, although if we get into the vulnerability section, you never know what will come out. But how do you amplify and increase your presence during stressful times? I imagine having a conference like this right now with everything that's going on.
Yeah, this last week was super stressful. Not well, always. I think that there's a real balance of just being present and knowing what we control and what we can't control. I can control how I respond to a situation. I can't control the situation. And I think making that distinction is really helpful for me, and that there is a type of grace that we can tap into beyond our rational minds. I think we rely on our rational minds way too much. Oh, I'm going to figure this out, or this is a problem, I'm going to have a solution. And more, I like to be present and open to something bigger than me. There's a story that just came to mind, and I'm not quite sure how it relates, but I'll tell the story. And the story is of my son, and he was 4 years old at the time. And we were in Taos, and there was a big a swimming pool with a water slide that was about 4 stories high. And so he's like, Dad, I want to go down the water slide. I'm like, all right, go for it. So he walks up, he gets to the top of the slide, he looks down, and then he walks back down. He's like, Dad, I can't do it. That's too much. I'm like, cool, you don't have to do it. 5 seconds later, Dad, I'm going to do it. He walks up to the top of the water slide, looks down, comes back down. 7 times. Walks up, comes back down, walks up, comes back down. And then finally, on the 8th time, he walks up, and I look, and I see his blonde hair swishing down the slide, and he splashes in the water, and he's like, Dad, look, I did it. I was like, Navarre, what got you through that break? What was it that you broke through that fear? What was it? How did you do it? And he's like, well, I was up there, and I was looking down, and I slipped. And I was like, you didn't? He's like, no, I slipped. I just accidentally fell. And I've always loved that story because I feel like there's grace, There's being present, and then there's all right, universe, make me slip. Or surrender to something bigger than our isolated self and what we can control and what we can't control. I can control my response. He can control the fact that he's going there and eventually he's going to slip and it's going to work out. And I feel like that helps me. There's a lot of things I can't control, but what can I control? I can control that I show up.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. And I would ask all of us that we each have our own, I believe, we each have our own secret sauce for how we become more present.
Yeah.
We each have our own way of doing it. I work a lot with my body. So I work a lot with the feeling of my feet on the ground and just walking and really feeling the bottom of my feet and letting my feet become very heavy. It's a way that helps kind of anchor me, and I come out of all this, kind of high velocity thinking, and suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm right here with this step. I also release my belly, because I notice that when I'm afraid, normally my stomach is starting to contract in some way. And if I can just breathe into my belly and have a kind of classic Buddha belly, suddenly there's all this space in the belly.
Yeah.
And when there's space in the belly, there's space for things to come in, and I'm not all clenched inside. Right. I could go on. I have about a dozen different somatic cues that I use. My hands can grip like a sloth, the feet, the hands grip it, releasing kind of them, and really just releasing all the tension from my body. And it's something that we can do right here while we're sitting with each other. It doesn't have to be some specific practice session. And I think especially when we talk about bringing these kinds of skills and capacities into work, they have to be things that we're doing while we're meeting and listening to somebody. And if you've ever noticed, you can probably notice it right now, you can listen and pay attention internally to what's happening. And in fact, the more you relax and open internally, the more you actually receive what the person's saying, the more deeply you take it in.
Right. And so how do you do that as a CEO of a company where people are looking to you for answers? They're looking for you to solve the problem. They're looking for you to figure it out. Can you just be with their energy if something's coming at you and they're really nervous and they're freaked out? Tami, this is an emergency, and they want you to freak out with them.
Sure. Well, I think the people at Sounds True, first of all, have come to realize that I probably don't have the answer. I may or may not have the answer. And so first of all, I think that paradigm and that expectation has been blown open. Like, what a ridiculous thing that just to think that because somebody's on the top of they're going to have all the answers to all these different questions. Now, you can take it in and you can say, why don't we gather some different perspectives?
Right, right.
Let me sit with that.
Yeah.
You know, I think we should talk to XYZ or this person or that person. So I think the first thing is dispelling that notion that my job is to have the answers. My job is to convene the right conversation.
Okay.
It's to hold the right space for the right conversation to happen so that a good, intelligent answer can emerge. And I can also share what I'm feeling and thinking in that moment. As you share this is what comes up for me. What's happening for you? And before you know it, there's a whole lot of truth in the room. We have a section at our leadership team meeting that happens once a week where we ask towards the end of the meeting, what's under the table? It's a great question to ask of a 13-person leadership team. And it's not so much like Tami solved the problem, it's like, what is it that we need to talk about?
That we might be afraid to bring up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That we're not saying it because it's under the table, but let's bring it up, let's put it on top of the table, let's all look at it, and let's talk about it together.
Right, got it. Because I notice for me, there's an anxiety that I can feel, and I'll bring home that anxiety, and all of a sudden my son, my wife, everybody in the family will have caught my anxiety, right? And it takes real presence to be able to notice an anxiety, whoever it's coming from, and to not feed that anxiety, or pain body, as Eckhart calls it, right?
Yeah.
To not feed that pain body. And I can imagine the more people you get in a room, the more impact we have. And one of the reasons I love Wisdom 2.0 is whenever I come here, I feel comfortable, generally, because I feel like, oh, these are my people, right? Like, I can be myself. I don't have to present a persona. I don't have to present an image. I don't have to, like, pretend I know the answers. I can just be myself. And I think, how do you create business where there is that sense of safety, or there is that sense of like, oh, I don't have to fight. I don't have to build up this ego or build up this persona and try and like show that I'm the smartest one in the room, or show that like I deserve the promotion.
Yeah.
And there's this quality of like competition. And so I'm wondering how you see that energy.
Well, first of all, I know I'm not the smartest person in the room on a lot of different things. And secondly, people see us. They see us. So wearing a mask and trying to project something and being sort of image-oriented, it doesn't really work for me. Like, and I don't hire people at Sounds True who are super image-oriented. It doesn't work for me. During the interview process, if I see that, I kind of get in there and I'm like, what's really going on? And you know, sometimes people will still be, it's a job interview, so they're like, this mask, okay, a little bit further, this mask, and like, I want to get under that, and I really want to get to know the person. And if I can't, and if they're not willing to go there with me and the other people that are interviewing them, they're probably not the right fit for our culture. Right. One of our values is authentic communication and authentic connection. Like, we're looking to really connect.
Yeah.
And so that's something we talk about. How do you feel about authentic connection? What does that mean to you? What do you think creates authentic connection when you're talking to other people? A big thing I've seen about vulnerability, and like anything, just like fear is contagious, vulnerability is contagious, courage is contagious. These things we have positive contagions. And you can see the metaphors I'm using today. And vulnerability, if I'm here and I'm vulnerable with you right now and with this group, I'm inviting that forward in the space.
Well, can you say about what vulnerability is to you? Because let's say we're in a business meeting and there's something going on. You're like, I'm really scared. I don't know. Everyone else is going to be like, oh shit, Tami's scared. I should be scared. So what does vulnerability look like for you in this situation?
Well, I'll tell you what it feels like. It feels like I've come to a fork in the road. And I have to ask myself, am I comfortable sharing this? Like, otherwise, I'm just like, blah, 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 this, that, But then there's this moment where I'm like, wow, this exposes me in a certain kind of way. This is not what people associate with me. I'm about to share and I can feel my heart rate starts to, and I see the choice point. I see it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, this is a moment where you're going to choose to be vulnerable with the group and say something. And usually for me, it has to do with some way that I'm having a hard time. Because it's like, especially when you're in the spiritual business, you're supposed to like always be, positive and have it together, and things in your life are supposed to be working. And
I don't know if anybody else has felt that pressure, but yeah, I've heard that happens to people.
I went through a period of time last year while my 93-year-old mom was dying. And I was surprised by how much grief I felt. I had known she would be entering the last chapter of her life for several years, but I was surprised. It impacted me very, very deeply. And I was not at my full capacity at work. I would say I was at, ready for this? 25% of my actual capacity. How long did it last? Truthfully, it lasted like 6 months. I was traveling back and forth to see her. I was praying for her during the day. I was thinking about her. I was feeling her. And I shared with our team, I'm at 25% of my normal capacity right now. And I'm going through something, and I want to let myself go through it because I feel it's an intense heart initiation for me. And I don't want to fight it, and I don't even know if I could fight it. Like, I just don't have that kind of productive go-getter energy. So that was a vulnerable thing to share with the team. And it brought out other kinds of confessions and sharings from people in the group. But I think the important thing is that moment where it's like, what will people think of me? But I'm going to say it anyway because it's what's real. It's the truth of what's happening.
Right.
Now I want to ask you a question, Soren, because this is supposed to be a dialogue.
Okay.
So I don't know if any of you...
As long as it's not a vulnerable thing, I'm fine with it. So go ahead.
It's something I'm genuinely...
Surface, I'm great with surface stuff.
No, it's a deep thing. It's something I'm genuinely curious about because it fits in a way with vulnerability, which is this kind of coming out of the closet, And to me, coming out of the closet as a lesbian at work, that was like nothing. But everyone, from when I was little, people could see that. I was like, yeah, we get it. But sharing...
Not a big surprise.
Right, no one was surprised. But sharing some of my deep inner visions and convictions, spiritual convictions, that's been scary for me. It's like, really? Wow, you're way more woo than we thought. And so you have a line on the bottom of your emails. It's a quote from Rumi that says, work in the invisible as much as you work in the visible.
Yeah.
And I've always thought, here I am, we're partners on the Inner MBA. We're doing this. How do you work in the invisible, Soren?
So that's my signature because I need to remember that. It's not because that's because I need to remember that. So for me, working in the invisible is to go walk in the woods for no reason whatsoever. It's to meditate and just be present for the sake of the practice. It's to wash the dishes just for the sake of washing the dishes. It doesn't improve my external world. It doesn't accomplish any great task. It doesn't grow whatever I wanted to grow or move forward a project. It's just done to cultivate the invisible, the inner world. And so for me, there's various actions that I can not do during the day. I cannot go into the woods. I cannot meditate. I cannot do these things. I can do a lot of productive things. Generally, they're more stressful. And so I write that. I love that quote from Rumi because at the end of the day, when I'm on my deathbed, whether that's tomorrow or 50 years from now or 75 years from now, my guess is what's really going to matter to me is not the visible world accomplishments, it's the invisible world actions. It's going to be, was I loving to my child when he got home? Was I compassionate with my wife? Was I connected to my friends? Those are what I would say invisible things. I can't physically show that they work. And so that signature is to remind myself, Soren, whatever you do in the physical world, it's not what really matters. What matters is the invisible world. And so I put it, it is. You can accomplish You can build companies and billion-dollar thises and billion-dollar that, and at the end of the day, we're all lying in the same deathbed, and we're all saying goodbye to this moment and to these physical forms and what's going to matter to us. And to me, it's the invisible that's going to matter. So that's my reminder to that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked about it.
And I think we're out of time, actually, speaking of death.
It's all the little death.
It always comes before we think it's going to come. But yes, we're out of time. Is there something else you want to read before we end?
No, I guess I just want to say something as we end, which is, at Sounds True, I think the whole entire journey for me has been really ultimately opening my heart more and more in work with the people I work with, loving the people I work with more and more, and letting them love me, not getting as much done as recognizing them, appreciating them. We end all of our leadership team meetings with a round of appreciations. It's just open. Anybody can appreciate anything about the other people on the team, the work they've been doing over the last week, things that have happened. And I think building those cultures of appreciation and those moments where it occurs to us to recognize or thank somebody for something that they've done, that is just such an easy way to bring more love at work, and people really feel it, and it brings the best out of them. And so I just wanted to share that with you because it's so simple and so practical, and I've taken this on now that anytime something happens and I have this moment of like, that was really good, that was really terrific, I should thank that person, I immediately stop and do it and write them a note, and it's made a big shift.
Great.
So I just leave that for you as a little practical gift. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you.